Hey, everybody. I am here with conversation number 47 with Josiah Neely of R Street. I'm Razib Khan of the Unsupervised Learning Podcast. I don't usually introduce us too much, but I think people know us, but, trying to get ourselves a little bit more professionalized, get a little bit more serious. And speaking of seriousness, Elon is getting serious about politics. He wants to create a new party called the American Party, which is apparently mostly supported by H-1Bs in Silicon Valley. Okay, I mean the memes and the jokes are just too much. Well, actually, the guy who registered his CFO at Tesla, and so it is Vaibhav Taneja,
Okay, yeah.
the American Party, and um, I don't know. A lot of people are okay. One thing I do have to say is like, look, I mean, Elon is Elon. He's a weird guy. I'm like, whatever. I think, some of our friends are just saying, just like chill out, just let him like do his thing and he'll come back. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of agree insofar as just like, he's a big deal, but he's one person. And, some people in like, the Republican world and MAGA, it's like he wasn't really part of that world until recently anyway. So
Yeah.
if he leaves, you're not like missing out on something that you had for a long time. He put in like a bunch of money and a bunch of enthusiasm for like that year, and you got a lot out of that. So whatever. I don't know. I think like some of the whining and the complaining is just like, just get over yourselves. Like, you go to the army that you go to battle with the army you have, and if he comes
Right.
back, he comes back, and if he doesn't come back, he doesn't come back. But it's just like not the end of the world.
Yeah. I've long been an Elon truster, an Elon plan truster, I guess you would say, where whenever he does something, I mean, as Peter Thiel famously said, don't bet against Elon. He has a track record of success against long odds and people saying that he's doing something that's stupid and it's going to fail, and then it works out. And he's obviously a very smart guy. So in general, whenever people have said with respect to whatever Elon's latest venture is that it's stupid or whatever, my thing has always been, well, we people are probably, if it looks like he's doing something stupid when he's clearly not a stupid person, then the most reasonable inference is that you're missing something, right? There's some other thing. I
Yeah.
will I will say this America Party thing, it really has been the first time where I have started to question that and wonder if, I don't know, maybe it
But
uh
Josiah, I mean, isn't there a demand for a socially liberal, fiscally conservative party?
yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so there's a couple of
Maybe we can change the name. We call it the Libertarian Party.
the Libertarian Party, yes, right, right. Uh I mean, I will get to my Elon Cope in a minute, but as you allude to, well, first, America is almost uniquely hostile to third parties, I would say, historically and currently, and part of that has to do with you know there's a thing in political science. I think it's called like de Vergner's law or something like that. I'm mispronouncing it, but the basic idea is that when you have a first past the post electoral system, right? So whoever gets the most votes wins, even if it's not a majority and it's winner take all. That tends to favor two parties for any particular election, right? Because if you have a third party, whether if you have two candidates on the right, that would allow potential, and they split the right of center vote, that would allow a left winger to get in with 40% of the vote or whatever, and vice versa. And in the U.S., that's kind of supercharged because we have not only do we have a bunch of local and statewide races, but we have a presidency, and it's electoral college presidency. So to win that, you have to, to become president, you basically have to dominate throughout the country, and so third parties in general, historically, if you look at them, uh, one, they tend to be personality focused. To the extent you've ever had third parties that have gotten any traction, they have tended to be some particular individual, uh, or they're pro segregation. There's also a history of that. But I mean, a popular individual like Teddy Roosevelt or Ross Perot or whatever. Okay, but even Ross Perot, who I think did about as well as any third party candidate in the last 100 years, you know, he got 19% of the vote, which was respectable, but he didn't win any states, and he didn't. I think he only came in second in a handful of states. So, you know, it's very difficult, and especially, and then you also get into there's issues with like ballot access, other things like that. It's very difficult to do a third party and have it have any success. Um, Elon, of course, is sort of a personality himself, and he's a rich guy, but he can't run. Certainly, he can't run for president. He could run for like some lesser office, I guess. But and as you alluded to, the other thing is if you were going to try and do a third party, you would want to go where the voters are, and if you just look at public opinion, there's a lot of people who are socially liberal in this country, and there are some people who are fiscally conservative, but there's very little overlap. That quadrant is very overrepresented among certain kinds of elites in the tech world, in journalism, like pundits, perhaps. But in terms of public support, I mean, there's just not a lot of, there's not a lot of traction there. And in particular, it's not even just a libertarian type of thing, but, the issues that he is focused on or says he wants to focus on are, H1B immigration, right? Okay, well, you know, that's appealing to a demographic that is not able to vote mostly. And then deficit reduction, which could, in theory, be issue that has some traction, but in the current environment, it really just doesn't. So if you were going to try and do a third party run, this would not be this. It didn't really seem like this would be the positioning, how you would want to position it. I think you would basically. I think what you would want is, um, someone who is, I don't know, like Bernie Sanders, but anti-trans, or anti-identitarian, right? Like that would be a bigger. I mean, you would almost want the opposite. You would want social conservative, fiscal liberal, right? That would be
Which, to
ish.
some extent,
Yeah, you don't. I mean, you don't want to
that
be.
Donald Trump went in that, like, a
Yes.
little bit in that way.
Yes. Correct. Yes. He kind of occupied the middle ground of American politics, which is another reason why right now I don't think is a good time for a third party. You could have 10 years ago or whatever, when you had um the Mitt Romney era Republican Party, then perhaps there was an opening for a candidate, who would have been like an immigration hawk, but doesn't want to touch Social Security or Medicaid, and is non-interventionist or less hawkish in terms of foreign involvement. All right, well, Trump did all that, so there's not really anything left. So I mean, this I think is a problem in terms of, is there any real chance of success for this thing? I would say no. Now, if I try and think, okay, well, if I try and apply my normal heuristic and say, well, Elon's not a stupid guy, he must realize this. So what else is going on? I think it's possible that the plan is not, he doesn't realistically think, okay, I'm going to form this party and we're going to win, but that by forming this party and running, depending on where you run candidates and depending on what you do in terms of donors or whatever, while you couldn't win, you could siphon off enough support to make it difficult for Republicans to win. So perhaps this is a kind of leverage play in the same way. And I don't know that this example that I'm about to give was done deliberately, but if you think back to the 2024 election, Robert Kennedy Jr., he was running as an independent and he was only polling at, I don't know, 6% of the vote, something like that. But it did seem at one point that he was pulling more Trump support than Harris support and potentially could have swung some states. And as a result, Trump kind of brought him on board, right? And gave him, and he's that's kind of worked out for him. He's HHS secretary now, and some of his issues have kind of gotten folded back into the wider, MAGA movement. So maybe that it's possible that Elon sees this as kind of like his way back into the tent. He can't win, but he can be a big enough of a headache that maybe Trump says, okay, well, we just got to buy him off. And I guess it depends on what he wants. If he wants a balanced budget and tons of H-1Bs, I don't think that's going to happen. If he wants a different NASA administrator or friendly NASA administrator or some other stuff like that, maybe that is possible. I don't know. So, we'll have to see. I'm a little discouraged, I will say, just based on, if we think back to his involvement in the German elections from a couple months ago. I know it's hard to remember back that far, but he went all in supporting, Elon did, Alternative for Deutschland, which it was pretty clear at the time could not win, but they did do well in the election relative to past performance. I think they had their best performance ever, but the result of that was not that they won or even that they were able to join the coalition. It's that the other right-wing party, they siphoned off enough support that party lost, and so the SDP is back in control now, right? So, that's kind of a possibility of what could happen with this American party. I think most likely, I think it'll just not go anywhere. I think I saw online that Mark Cuban and Anthony Scaramucci had expressed interest in joining the America Party or whatever. And, these are not good signs for like the ultimate the party or whatever, but you could siphon off enough votes or donors or other things to create some headaches, I would say, for the Republicans in particular.
Yeah, maybe. I think this stuff is like pretty volatile and erratic. I mean, yeah, I don't think the success probability is high. So, the American issue with third parties is third parties have been successful very rarely, and the way they become successful is they become one of the two parties. So
yeah. Well, okay. So I would say even that has really, if you look at American history, the only okay. So originally there were not supposed to be any political parties. The founders didn't like them, but they quickly developed. And so you had two, the Democratic Republican Party and then the Federalist Party. The Federalists were completely wiped out. The Democrat Party then just the Democratic Republican Party split into the Democrats and the Whigs, and then people will sometimes cite the Republican Party as an example of a third party that ended up becoming dominant as one of the two major parties. But that is really not what happened. What happened is the Whig Party imploded, and you had one election. It's probably the only election in American history where you really did have three viable parties, because there were two options to try and be the successor to the Whigs as the other party besides the Democrats. There was the Republican Party, and then there was the. Actually, I think it might have been I think it might have been called the American Party. It was the Know Nothings. Uh, in the 1856 election, both of them were kind of vying to see who would become the new major party, and the Republicans ended up winning that. So, I mean, that's not really in other countries, like in the UK, it is the case that the Labour Party started out as a fringe party, and then it's just slowly built up support and supplanted the Liberals and became one of the two major parties. And you have in other countries, you have examples of that. But in the US, really, really, that doesn't happen. And I think there's a reason why, the oldest continuous political party in the world is the Democrat Party, and the Republican Party is the third oldest. It's much easier to take over, as Trump showed, it's much easier to take over and transform one of the two parties than it is to try and come up with some third option and supplant one of the two. So, or compete as a third option. So, I don't see that happening. It's also the case. How to put this? I mean, Elon, he has been known to kind of be really focused and intent on something for a little while and then shift its attention and gears totally. So it's not clear to me that the America Party will even exist in 18 months, when you have the midterms, let alone the next presidential election or whatever, so who knows, right? History is happening fast. Maybe by then, he and Trump will have worked out a deal where he becomes governor of Mars, and the America Party becomes the Mars Party. I don't know, right? You never know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's pretty. There's a lot of little forks here. I will say, I think like the fiscal stuff. I think there's no good yeah path. I mean, at least currently, I think maybe if our interest rates,
Right.
Americans have cared about fiscal issues in the 1990s when the bond market started freaking out,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So when we get the feedback, we will start caring. We don't care right now. I do think with the immigration, there's more chance actually for various compromises because I think the actions of ICE and the Trump administration are basically causing self-deportation right now, or like just a stoppage of the massive flows. And what happens when Americans think that the border is under control is thermostatically they tend to become more, just open to immigration. The H-1B thing in particular, the people who are mad about that are a particular subset of skilled workers in particular. And
Yeah.
I personally actually do think the H-1B is a problem because you basically create a guest worker program without calling it a guest worker program.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually open to guest worker programs. We just need to kind of be open about what we're doing and then have like laws that are transparent about it. Okay, they don't have the same rights, whatever.
Right.
But it's just like we have all these like weird visas.
This is your British butler fantasy.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, kind of. Although, like, I actually believe that like if you're British, you should just be able to you don't get welfare, and you don't get to vote.
Right.
But you should be able to just like move here and try to like, mow my lawn. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't care. You should be able to mow my lawn. But yeah, as an independent contractor or whatever. But so I think that it depends. And I think this is gonna be like no labels, and these rich billionaires. This is like a routine thing where the fiscally conservative, socially liberal tends to be billionaires.
Mhm.
Like a lot of the billionaires. But like the reality is like they can like fund a lot of operatives, but it turns out there's just not enough votes there.
Yeah.
Outside of like a few areas. So the one thing that I do have to say though, I wonder is, okay, the assumption is, oh, because uh, Elon is, was with MAGA recently. He is the American Party would pull more from the Republicans, but it can be a little surprising sometimes. And if it is fiscally conservative and socially liberal, arguably it's going to be really attractive to a lot of people that are that are Romney Harris voters. They're not that many, but
Yeah.
they tend to be in the suburbs, and like kind of like ritzy suburbs. Those areas, they're not like that huge of
Yeah.
a slice of the pie, but they could actually cause a big they could make the difference in favor of the Republicans in some place like North Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay, probably not Virginia. I think Virginia is just now lean blue, you know. But there are some like bubble states, like maybe New Hampshire. New Hampshire definitely actually. New Hampshire, the American Party could actually do pretty. It's one of the few states where I can imagine it doing. I mean, actually, it was one of Perot's biggest states. These like New England states were huge for Perot. So I think that's one of the things. I think one of the issues going on here is billionaires like, and he's like 100 billionaire. He's an aristocratic billionaire. Because the billionaires they come in different. Like I know people like I know billionaires, but the billionaires I know really well are very modest, of the, lower gentry of billionaires. They're like barely billionaires,
Yeah.
they're like single digit billionaires. Okay. Yes, I do know single digit billionaires. And single digit billionaires are just like you and me. It's the 100 millionaires, like people like Michael Dell. Like those people are hard to get to because they have, you have to go through the lower billionaires to get to them,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's just like, it's really difficult. But anyway, Elon has a lot of money. There's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna tell him what he wants to hear. So
Right.
I think we're just gonna let it play through and see how it goes. I do think, he's kind of an interesting bundle of contradictions. And I think partly that's because he is really focused on getting to Mars and everything else is commentary, So, he obviously wants these EV credits and all this stuff, and he's really pro electric. And, I'm kind of pro electric. I don't have like strong opinions about the credits, but I do think the Republicans are a little bit knee jerk about being pro coal right now, but I don't know. You know more about this stuff than me. Kind of like almost like in a culture war way, where I think
Yeah.
like batteries are getting better, and we're gonna go electric for most things, but not everything. Um, okay, and I actually have a similar philosophy at this point on energy that I do about housing. I just want more of all of it.
Hmm.
Right.
Right.
Like I want like open up the Atlantic and open up the Pacific coasts to oil development, Don't have it just be Texas and Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Southern California, the Southern Central Valley still has a fair amount of oil derricks actually around Bakersfield. Anyway, I want there to be more of that out there on the table. I want there to be more renewable, I want our grid to be built up. We just need more. We need to build more. And it's kind of the Texas philosophy, right? So anyway, but then like there's other things, there's fiscal obsessions, which are like, okay, that's fine, but on the other hand, you want other types of subsidies.
Right.
I don't know about that. I share a lot of his fiscal concerns. I just like wonder about the bundle of beliefs that he sometimes has. He's very anti woke. He is against. I think his immigration position is actually like pretty mainstream.
Yeah.
I think. I think both the Democrats and Trump, and especially some of the people under Trump, are actually outside the mainstream, candidly. And like, obviously the media is overdoing some of the ICE stuff, but they're clearly just trying to scare. I mean, honestly, they are scaring people, and they are trying to scare people. That's kind of the plan. So
Mhm.
sometimes when the Democrats are like, "Oh my God, like look what they're doing," do you understand that they're doing that because they are trying to reverse the idea that was inculcated under the Biden administration that if you just get here, you'll be good.
Yeah. And a
You're not
lot
going to be
of,
good.
I will also say on the immigration thing, there's really a lot of continuity. Even in the Biden administration, I mean, they didn't call it alligator Alcatraz or whatever, but they did have detention facilities for illegal immigrants, and they did, uh, deport people, and they did do all this stuff. Not on the same scale, perhaps, especially under Biden. The border was definitely out of control, and so there are some differences, but I think some of it is just media. Uh, both left and right media have a tendency and an interest in hyping up Republican immigration enforcement efforts and then just kind of ignoring those same efforts when the Democrat is president. Right. So that's
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah, the Obama administration, the left did call him deporter in chief,
Right. Right.
and he was doing that actually to get an immigration deal. I mean, whatever. I'm not saying. I mean, I don't think immigration was like that big of an issue for Obama. Actually, I just think he wanted another win aside from
Yeah.
healthcare, whatever. Okay, so I think the American Party is interesting. Maybe it'll keep Elon busy, and he won't act out a little bit. Shall we say? Let's talk about kind of something sad.
Yeah.
So, right now the death toll is 27. And some flash floods here in Texas in the Hill Country by Kerrville. These are terms and words that I am familiar with now after a decade living in this region. You're native. Can you talk to us about the Hill Country, the flash floods, Kerrville, in like the historical context and what happened? Because I mean, this happens unfortunately, so it's not like shocking.
Yeah. So it is a striking thing about Texas, especially the Hill Country, is it doesn't. I there's like an old joke, um, where someone comes to the Hill Country and he says, uh, how like it seems kind of dry. How much does it rain here? And the local person says, "Oh, I think we get about 30 inches of rain a year, right?" I don't know what let's say that's the number. And the visitor says, "Oh, well, that doesn't seem like a lot." And the native says, "Yeah, but if you're here on the day that all that, if you're here on that day, it is a lot, right?" So one thing that will happen is when it rains in Texas, like there will be long periods where it just won't rain at all, and then it'll just be a deluge, right? And this is, and so you can have flooding, you can have other things like this. This has happened periodically in the Guadalupe River, and this, it happened, I guess, uh, this week here in Austin. It did rain pretty hard, but I don't think that there was a terrible amount of flooding in the city proper, but out to the west a little bit of the city in Kerrville, other places like that. It really, I mean, some of the images. There was a huge amount of rain, flooding. It happened really fast, and I think the stories that have kind of really stuck with people are some of these summer camps, for kids, where uh, you know, people were just kind of trapped. People were hanging in trees. People were floating on mattresses. A lot of them have been rescued, but a lot of them were not. People are still missing. People have been, their remains, their bodies have been found. Uh, it's a very, I mean, it as a parent, it feels to me kind of like a nightmare scenario. You send your kid off to summer camp, and despite the fact that this stuff does happen, it's not unique in history. It's not high on your list. It's not like a week ago parents were worrying about that as a risk to their kids, and you go, they're an hour or two away from you at one of these camps, and then next thing you know, you don't know if they're even alive or not. So that's it's a heartbreaking situation. Um, Obviously, I think we have started to enter the political phase where people are trying to pick out various culprits, mostly stupidly, in my opinion. So, for example, and I think it is true. People were. I think it is true that um, at NOAA there were a couple of vacant positions uh, due to Doge cuts or other things like that, including uh, the weather warning coordinator for San Angelo region or the San Antonio Austin region or whatever was vacant. The guy retired a couple months ago, and so people have been citing that. I haven't every all the indications I have seen is it wasn't a problem with lack of warnings. People got the warnings at about when you would expect them to, right? But people are going to cite stuff like that. There's also, I guess, now people are raising questions about cloud seeding. Um, so the state of Texas is one of a handful of states that does have some cloud seeding programs that are funded, I think, by I think it's mostly local. There might be some state money. I don't know, but um, this is when you have farmers, oftentimes uh, there can be a lot of money in trying to do things to increase rainfall, and so there have been some questions about that. I mean, uh, to my way of thinking, and from what I know about cloud seeding technology and its effectiveness and whatever, I mean, it seems unlikely that that would have played a major role in this. I'm not saying, I think the typical estimate that you might see for cloud seeding is like 10% increase or something like that, So it's not going to create a huge uh, flash flood. But I don't know. So people are talking about that. People are talking about all sorts of other stuff, and it's unfortunate that tragedies end up getting becoming political footballs in this way. But that's the nature of modern life, I guess.
Yeah. So one thing that I will say about the cloud seeding stuff, I know Augustus Dorico personally. We're not close friends, but we're good acquaintances too. Well, I don't know what like distant friends is, but we're kind of like in that acquaintances to friend interaction zone.
Yeah.
We've hung out IRL. We talked about various things. I met him. I think it was like 2022. So it was a while ago. It was before he became as famous as he is now. One thing I'll say about Augustus is, he's a very, as people know, Gundo and Elsa Gundo is like a whole thing. It's pretty like conservative, a bit of MAGA coded, but he's also a very politic person. And he tries to um, kind of stay in the good graces of everybody because, he wants RainMaker to be used by everybody.
Right.
It's not a culture war technology,
Yes.
RainMaker he wants to make a difference. He wants to change the world. So I wonder if some of the sniping at Augustus from, kind of the more conspiratorial MAGA people is also because, for example, he's taken a picture with Hillary Clinton and tweeted it out, like it was
Mm-hmm.
cool. And some people have been like, what's up, bro? Like, are you really one of us? I've seen that online. I just wonder if that's, I
Maybe.
think he is conservative and he's very open about it, but he doesn't like put all the red meat out there constantly,
Yeah.
which is, if you're a CEO of a company like Rainmaker, you do have to be very careful unless you're just like, okay, I'm only going to sell to people that are aligned, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And I don't think he wants to do that. He wants to sell to governments, you know?
Right.
And so you got to kind of keep some of your cards closer to the vest. And I think that that's an issue. I know who he is. I think people who know who he is know that he would never get involved in these sorts of shenanigans, first of all. I mean, that's just way too high of a risk. That's
Yeah.
kind of like Theranos level malfeasance, and I don't think Rainmaker would do that. I mean, there are people who are skeptical about Rainmaker's viability. All this geoengineering stuff is, it's pretty out there. But no, all of the online conspiracy theorists are. I don't know what to say. I do think he had a pretty good response when it comes to the PR. One thing that I will say is they're talking about like now moving all the camps away from the rivers.
Mm,
I get it. I'm just gonna put it out there. This happens every couple of decades. This
right.
sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think we do need to think about like be careful to not overreact. You know,
Yeah.
Flash floods do happen. Instead of moving the camps, I mean, I don't know how we could do a better warning system.
Yeah.
There's other things we could do. You know,
I don't. Yeah. I will say. I mean, I don't. As someone who lives in Texas, grew up in Texas, went to summer camps in Texas, it's hard for me to imagine a summer camp in Texas that wasn't near the water.
hmm
You know what I mean?
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's just like you're not. I mean, like it defeats kind of the purpose. I mean, not totally, but a big part of the camps is you do swimming activities or water activities every day. If it's kayaking or swimming or whatever, and if you didn't do that in a Texas summer, I mean, what are you gonna do? Just like sit inside and play video
There's no
games?
point. Yeah, don't just go to Schlitterbahn. Just
Yeah,
go to Schlitterbahn.
yeah. And of course, yeah. So I mean, you could just do like swimming pools or whatever, but that also kind of defeats the purpose of the camp to some
Yeah,
extent. So I don't. I
I,
mean,
the part of the issue, like, so we got kids, and I think that one of the things that once you have kids is these stories are very painful. I haven't read a lot of them. Not gonna lie, I don't want to read it.
yeah,
I don't want to imagine like a 10-year-old girl.
right, yes,
I don't even want to say it.
yeah,
Because you see your own kids, you feel your own kid, and in the abstract, before you have kids, of course, like your heart goes out to these people. But once you have a child, your heart goes out to like that could be you. You
right,
know. So I don't want to like make light of these camps and what happened to them, but helicopter parenting is an issue.
hmm
And like
yeah,
parents today, they want their kids to be 100.00000% safe, and
yeah,
the safest thing to do is just like lock your kids in the house.
right. I mean that.
So
I
let's
think
let's
that's
be honest about this.
probably yeah. To the extent that there is a reaction, maybe that will be more of it. We were talking, I think, in the last episode about summer camps, and I mean, a lot of them now are not sleepaway camps, right? I mean, they're like day camps, and they're STEM focused or educational somehow, or sports or whatever. So maybe the incidents like this will probably perhaps encourage that trend. Um, but I don't know. I mean, people are different. Some people are not going to want to send their kids to this on the off chance that something bad could happen. Other parents are going to feel differently. People have different perspectives on that sort of thing, and I don't know if there's something that could be done in terms of federal flood control or what. I don't know anything about that, but uh, it would be. I mean, it would be kind of a shame if people didn't have those, weren't able to have those experiences anymore because camp, it can be
Tra- yeah, the way I'll say it is like tragedies should not make it so we can't have nice things.
right,
Okay,
right.
this is like a fundamental problem in America. This is a problem with our space, manned space.
Hmm. Right,
Right now, the demands for safety are out of control. Now that's for adults, and I think like that's a whole different thing. And yeah, I don't know. It's difficult. And you don't want to get demonized when you say like, oh, like don't move the kids away, from the water. But kids love water.
right,
I mean, this is like a great joy for them, and this tragedy with these girls, and and the people who are taking care of them, and like let's there is So the head of the camp, the older gentleman, Eastland, I believe,
Yeah.
is that his name? He was rescuing the girls, and he perished in
Right.
that.
Yeah. Right.
There's another story of a father who the floodwaters were rising, and he broke the window with his hand
Right.
that like pushed them through, and then he bled to death.
Yeah. Cut his artery or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, he saved his family, he saved his wife and kids. I think his mother-in-law too. But in any case, there has been like great heroism at great personal cost, the ultimate personal cost. And so, it's a tragedy. It's a difficult story to talk about, but let's also reflect that it shows, like the greatness in humanity. Like there's some
Right.
heroes who are being highlighted, and I think it's I don't know. It's the flip side of tragedy is that you see the metal, what people are made of,
Right.
you see the measure of them, and so I don't know. You saw this during 9/11, all of these tragedies. War is horrible, and people who've been to war like say, you don't know how horrible it is, but then they also say things like, "But I will never experience that sort of camaraderie ever again." Because like when you're facing death together with somebody else, that is not an experience you can replicate. You
Yeah.
know. So anyway, so that's pretty downer. I think in terms of like climate change and all these things that people are talking about. Look, I mean, disasters have been happening forever. Like we've actually gotten way better, as you know.
Yeah.
The data. Warning systems are better. Flood control systems are better. Overall, it's actually in a better situation. It's just that like the news cycle and social media and everything amplifies,
Right.
and so it just looms over us. I will say, Josiah, we live in Austin. I don't like floods. They're kind of like I've never. Okay, my family's from Bangladesh, so I guess I've technically experienced floods. But it's like floods that when you kind of like expect them are a little different. But in any case, so the systems are designed to take them. But what I would say though is, I live where I live in Austin. Actually, I specifically selected a location. I mean, you know where I live, but I selected a location that was above the high water mark for those like flood of a generation that happen in Austin every now and then.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, you can think of, I mean, it's trade offs, So I have like I have a friend who lives on the south side of Austin, but like right south of the river. And it's a great location. And he was saying, the recent rains, because he's only been living there for 4 years. And it was like a pretty good price, although it's spendy. It's a nice location. It's in Rollingwood for the people who care. But anyway, he didn't realize until the recent rains and like the saturation, like the kind of puddle that would
Hmm.
kind of you know menace his property. You know, you d-
Right.
you don't know these tail risks until they get into your face.
Yeah.
I looked at like historical record, and I was like, okay, I just want to make sure that I'm north of 6th Street, because
Mhm. Right.
there's a gradient, as you know, around there
Right.
between like 4th to about like 6th and 7th, and on that gradient, it's like the water is coming down, and then it's the flats. Like it's
Oh,
flat at 4th Street down to the river,
yeah.
and so that's where like the max flooding reaches. I don't want to be anywhere near flooding. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to like deal with the power outages and all those other things. And so, you just need to think about what you're comfortable with. I lived in California, obviously earthquake risk, but the reality with earthquakes, I mean, there's some really bad earthquakes out there, but like Japan has earthquake risk. Tokyo has these skyscrapers. I feel like modern developed societies with our architecture and our retrofitting and everything and our inspections, we're pretty good with dealing with earthquakes.
Mhm. Right.
On the other hand, my personal like because I have experience living in Texas, I've had friends who've lost their houses, multiple friends who've lost their houses in Houston
Yeah.
in the last 10 years. I feel like
Hurricanes.
flooding and hurricanes and these sorts of things, I don't think they scare people as much because I think earthquakes really scare people and people take it seriously
Right.
and they'll pay for the retrofit or whatever. I think with flooding, I don't think it's just like, oh, the water's gonna rise. We'll just like, whatever. We'll just go to the second floor. You know?
Right.
And they don't understand that like, that much water damage will just destroy the house, especially in a lot of the McMansions that are not
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's what happened in Houston. There were a lot of McMansions and, levees and various things like overflowed and, a week after the hurricane. This was in
Right.
2018, I think, right?
Right.
And so, for me, I don't like flooding. I also don't like fires. That was what I was always scared about in California.
Yeah.
But I didn't live in a big fire zone like Malibu. There are certain really nice areas that people live in that are also fire zones. Like you live up on top of a hill,
Hmm.
overlooking like golden Tinder. I mean, it's like, what are you thinking? So I'm not pointing any fingers here when it comes to natural disaster. On the other hand, there's certain types of disasters that happen in certain areas. Like if you
Right.
live in Tornado Alley, you're gonna see a tornado. If you're scared of that,
Right.
move. You know,
Yeah.
if you live in California, you just have to expect that at some point you'll shake a little. Like the big ones, I've never experienced one of the big earthquakes, but when I lived in the Bay, I think there was like one earthquake I could feel like every year,
Mhm.
like a little bit of shaking. So I mean, it's just you just got to figure out what your tolerance is, your risk tolerance, and then we need to deal with it. And we are never going to abolish tragedy,
Right.
which is like because if you've abolished tragedy, you stop living.
Mhm.
And I think one thing that we should continue to endeavor, trying to like end on a positive note, is just continue to live life and enjoy it and the outdoors, and that's what the camps are about. The
Yeah.
kids have fun, they run outside, and um we cannot like we cannot have it be that we want them so safe that they can't have a childhood. That's
Right.
what I want to keep that in mind. Even though this tragedy is like really in our minds right now. So
Yeah. I definitely I agree with that, and I think probably we've gone. I mean, not with respect to the flooding thing. Actually, that doesn't seem like a huge concern for people, but other like tail risks, I think people are maybe, especially with regard to children, a little too worried about, and they're not thinking about what they're giving up in order to protect themselves from, stranger danger or other stuff like that, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I think like next we're gonna be talking about African American candidate for mayor in New York City. This is
Right.
gonna be paywall. Okay, we're gonna close it. We're gonna close it. Close it. Okay, yeah, paywall. Zohran Mamdani. Okay, so I'm actually gonna like tell people things about Mamdani's background that a lot of people don't know. Maybe I probably have tweeted about it. It's not a big deal, but like people just should have context.
Yeah.
So Zohran Mamdani's father is from the Koja community. The Kojas used to be a caste called Lohana, and the Lohanas are merchants that live in the northwest coast of India in Sindh province in the former Pakistan, and also there's Gujarati Lohanas. In the caste system that you read about, they are Vaishyas, and so they're not Brahmins, they're not warriors, but they're also not like lower caste. Okay,
They're like,
they're twice born.
are they like
What?
business people or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
merchants like traders, farmers, whatever. They're clean. I mean, they can what is it? So like the Brahmins can teach the scripture. I think I don't remember what the Kshatriyas can do that's like unique besides under listen. The Vaishyas can like hear the scripture.
Okay.
So they're one of, they're an Aryan caste, right? So that's one thing. But anyway, like so the Kojas, they were converted to Islam by a group called Ismailis, which is like a branch of the Shia Muslim religion, which is kind of really esoteric. And M many people would call it what's called a Gulat sect, which means extreme. So they have, like, really extreme like, they're really, really, obsessed with the imamate, with the imams, and the largest group of Ismailis, are the Nizari sect. There are a lot of sects, but the Nizaris are the largest, and they're led by a guy called Aga Khan, who's basically now, just a rich white billionaire, but his paternal lineage, goes back to Ali, the Caliph Ali, the Muhammad's son-in-law. These Ismailis, they have imams, they're descended from the Prophet Ali, and I think they're descended through the Prophet through his daughter. Anyway, okay, they're kind of a small sect. They were actually the sect that created the assassins. The Mongols destroyed, Alamut, their fortress. They also had a caliphate
Mhm.
called the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt. The collapse of the Fatimid Caliphate actually is what precipitated the controversies that resulted in the Crusades. Because the Fatimids were Ismailis, they were a minority, and they tend to be really tolerant of the Christians and all the other minorities in Egypt. And they also ruled much of the Levant for a while. What happened is when the Fatimids were overthrown by Sunni Muslims, um, they were the majority, and they started oppressing the minorities, which included the Christians. And so, they're kind of implicated in that historical event. In relevance to Mamdani, so his father is by lineage a Khoja, which are a group of merchants, Gujarati merchants who were Hindu merchants who were converted to Ismaili Islam. Originally, their religion was actually pretty mixed with Hinduism. Their the Ismaili saints, kind of indicated that. Uh, okay, so in Islam, there's all these prophets, okay, and Jesus, about obviously Moses, all of these, but there's actually a interpretation that that there's actually a lot of prophets that are not named, but it's just because, like, if you're going to reveal something to Muhammad, um, I mean, if you think the Buddha is the prophet, like Muhammad's not going to know what that means. Okay, so I've seen it. It's actually like pretty widespread for a lot of Muslims to say Zoroaster was probably a prophet. He's not mentioned in the Quran because in Arabia that just would not be a reference that they would understand. And so the conversion of the Khoja involved some syncretism with Hinduism.